Back in Africa again. Feels good. All those islands were fun, but on the mainland, we can actually talk about wonky borders, which is the reason I started this whole series in the first place. So, number 16, Angola. Like its neighbor Zambia, Angola straddles the boundary between southern and central Africa. I've put it in the latter. It sits mostly on the southern African plateau, while its northern half belongs to the Congo Basin, the main feature of Central Africa. The thin coastal lowlands soon give way to the northern extension of the Great Escarpment, characterized by high, steep mountains. The Angolan highlands then dominate the center of the country, from the relatively low Malanje in the north to the Ba in the south, towering over 7,100 feet, 2,000 meters in elevation. Southeast, rivers flow into the wide wetlands of Namibia and Zambia, while northwards they cut canyons towards the Congo River. It should come as little surprise that most of Angola is covered in savanna. Like in Zambezia, Miombo woodlands are found in the highlands, Mopane in the low. Dry forest, savanna, and grassland dot the southeastern edges. The northwestern coast savanna is particularly rich in plant and animal species. Northern Angola transitions to the Congo jungle, with a mosaic of densely forested riverbanks interspersed with savanna. Beyond the mangroves of the Congo River's mouth, in the little exclave of Cabinda, true rainforest begins. In the southwest is the northern extension of the Caucavelt Desert and the Schwarzrand dry savanna. Angola's climate is highly seasonal, like most of Africa. Wet season November to April, dry May to October. The cold Benguela Current and escarpment create dry conditions along the coast, driest in the Caucavelt. The north is tropical, warm year-round, the highlands cooler, and even chilly in winter. With Africa, we're dealing with places that have been inhabited by humans for well over 1,000,000 years. Towards the end of the last ice age, the indigenous Angolans were the product of mingling of two genetic lineages, the Khoisan of the south and the Pygmies of the north. We've met them before. They are the Batwa, living in migrating bands of hunter-gatherers following herds of antelope, buffalo, and elephant. This story is familiar from our time in the south. The agricultural Bantu people steadily spread from their origins somewhere in what is now Cameroon, taming more and more wilderness. Of course, the archaeological record is incomplete, but around 3,000 years ago they occupied the Congo Basin, and by the beginning of the first millennium they break into the Okavango and Zambezi watersheds. The poor Batwa are driven into out-of-the-way places or otherwise absorbed into the new social order. So, let's decipher how the Bantu diverged into the many different groups of modern-day Angola. The southwestern group originates from those in the lands south and west of the Angolan highlands, all the way from the Kwanza River to the Linyanti Swamp. In the Angolan highlands themselves, and the upper reaches of the Zambezi, and the hills between the Kwango and Kasai, what I call the Upper Zambezians form. The Congo is a vast area. There are at least 100 languages spoken within its basin. Some order can be made of this wondrous diversity, however. In the lowlands below the Livingstone Falls of the Congo and the Kwango Valley emerge the western Congo Bantu, while the rest of the Kasai River system is home to the southern Congo Bantu. Further divisions follow. The southwesterners break into the Ovimbundu along the coast, the Nyanyeka along the Chela Mountains, the Ovambo of the middle Kunene and Atosha Pan, and the Kavango along the Okavango and Chobe rivers, typically called the Kubango and Kwando rivers in Angola. The Upper Zambezians go their separate ways, with the Luyana in the Barotse floodplains, north of them the Luvale, the Luchazi in the highlands, and the Chokwe in the northern territories. The western Congo become the Congo proper in the lowlands around the river they give their name to, as well as the Kwango, while the Ambundu form along the Kwanza River. And finally, the southern Congo peoples in Angola become the Lunda of the Upper Kasai. The Atlantic coast proved to be a bountiful place, because soon agricultural surpluses stimulated the growth of larger settlements, division of labor, and the development of true cities and kingdoms. This is significant, because whole cloth this appears to have only happened in a few places around the world. The Swahili and Shona kingdoms of East Africa were stimulated by the growth of the Indian Ocean trade. But at first Congo was isolated. No one was sailing from West Africa, or trekking through the jungle to spread civilization to Congo. They invented it themselves. By the mid-13th century, the Congolese had accreted into small kingdoms, forging three rival confederations: Vungu north of the river, Mpemba south, and the Seven Kingdoms in the east. Knowledge about these early kingdoms is sparse, but by 1390, Lukeni Lua Nimi, king of Vungu, conquers Mpemba, becoming the first Mwene Congo, king of Congo. By the mid-15th century, Congo's presence prompts the formation of neighboring states that are in turn subjugated. The Congo Empire lords over the Congolese kingdoms of Ngoyo, Kokongo, and Loango, and the Ambundu kingdoms of Undongo and Matamba. To the northeast, the Teke kingdom of Anziku remains independent, kept as a buffer against the wild tribes of the interior. Congo becomes a populous and highly centralized state, and its nobles demand things like cloth and copper, encouraging the blazing of the copper road along the southern Congo and Zambezi rivers. This wealth might have attracted a people all the way from what is now South Sudan, the Umbunda. I couldn't find anything about exactly where they came from or who they were, but they settled in the highlands amongst the Luchazi around 1400, adopting the local language. It is in this context, in 1483, that Portuguese explorer Diogo Cao discovered the Congo Kingdom, beginning the modern history of Angola. The Portuguese must have so impressed the Congolese with their modern technology that nobles went to learn in Portugal, and King Nzinga adopted a Portuguese name, João I. In 1491, he was baptized as a Christian, and soon much of the kingdom followed. Congo began importing Portuguese clergymen, adopting writing and other institutions of their Portuguese benefactors. Perhaps some of these spread south, as around 1500 the Umbunda began asserting themselves as rulers of the Luchazi and Luvale. But this honeymoon was not to last. The Iberian kingdoms of Portugal and Castile signed the 1494 Treaty of Tordesillas, granting each a hemisphere of the world for their empires. They thought, and the Pope at the time agreed, their discovery of new lands in America, Africa, and Asia entitled them to rule and Christianize. From their perspective, this was merely the logical continuation of medieval trends, the expansion of Christian civilization. Fresh off the Reconquista, Iberia was looking beyond its shores for more adventures and glory. Portugal, of course, found that, in footholds in Brazil, Mozambique, and India. Portugal got Congo to convert, but they also wanted land, and something else. 1556, the Portuguese supported one of Congo's vassals, Ndongo, in a bid for independence. Ndongo soon became a major exporter of a good the Portuguese needed for their new colony of Brazil. People. Slavery was widely practiced in Africa, often as war captives, but this peculiar institution intensified in the 16th century. The Portuguese and later other European colonies needed cheap labor for sugar, cotton, and tobacco plantations. Black Africans were attractive in the New World, robust, resistant to diseases that had torn apart red American communities, and they had few roots in their new homes, making them easier for owners to control. The voyage across the Atlantic, however, was absolutely appalling, and mortality was high. Slaving raids by peoples like the Ndongo and Ovumbundu may have prompted some of the Ovambo to migrate into the Caucavelt, becoming the Herero. Slave raids increased, and local communities were devastated by this intense harvesting. Portuguese were willing to pay in guns and other manufactured goods local chiefs and kings wanted to solidify their power. 1568, Lunda warriors from the east, searching for glory and riches, invade the Kwango Valley, and Congo itself. They stay and found their own realm in the Kwango, becoming the Yaka people. Congo is severely weakened by this invasion, and its vassals break away. Perhaps to garner Portuguese support, the Congolese capital of Mbanza is renamed São Salvador, after Christ himself. But the Portuguese wanted empire at the expense of Congo. In 1575, they received permission to found a city near the mouth of the Kwanza, Luanda. This formally marks the beginning of the Portuguese colony. It was originally chartered to establish itself in the kingdom of Ndongo. The ruler of Ndongo held the title of Angola, and the name was applied both to the kingdom and the colony that grew up along its coast, Angola, the quintessential slaving colony. Perhaps to defend against slave raids, or to exploit the copper road, or both, the Lunda consolidated as their own rival kingdom along the Kasai. 1617, Portugal founds another settlement further to the south, to better service their Ovumbundu suppliers, Benguela, which gives its name to the ocean current. Portuguese settlement is meager, so to support their colonial garrisons, the Portuguese recruit native mercenaries, the Imbangala. These fierce warriors come from a number of peoples, but seem to mainly have been Lunda. In 1620, they caused trouble in the Upper Congo, founding their own kingdom of Kasanje at the expense of their Yaka brethren. Well, these mercenaries on a slave raid gone wrong resulted in a war between Portugal and Congo in 1622. After some successes, the Portuguese are thrashed in 1623, and they withdraw for a time. The next year, a woman rose to power in Undongo, Ujinga Mubandi, baptized Ana de Sousa. The Portuguese did not like her, and in 1626 they installed a rival as puppet. But Queen Njinga was a powerful warrior queen, and waged war against the Portuguese. In 1631 she conquered Matamba. Congo, meanwhile, was increasingly frustrated with their former friends, and joined forces with the Portuguese's colonial nemesis, the Dutch. In 1641 they captured Luanda and Benguela, but Congo was unable to completely defeat the Portuguese. 1647 Njinga and the Dutch linked up, but were defeated, and Portugal retook its colony the next year. Queen Njinga wasn't always successful, but was fierce and tenacious, and finally in 1657 the Portuguese agreed to withdraw from much of Ndongo. They expanded along the coast, but Njinga continued to rule as queen of both Matamba and Ndongo. For her efforts resisting the Portuguese, she is remembered as Mother of Angola. 1663 she died of old age, and Ndongo passed back into Portuguese orbit. 1665 they exacted revenge on the Congolese at the Battle of Umbuilu. King Antonio I is killed, and Congo is plunged into a violent civil war over the succession. A curious event, a large number of Congolese captives were enslaved and shipped off to Brazil. One was a prince named Ganga, who became ruler of a New World kingdom of escaped slaves, remembered as a folk hero in Brazil, Gaga Zuba. 1670 Ndongo attempted to throw off the Portuguese yoke, only to be conquered in 1671. The Portuguese are able to maintain their hold in Angola, versus the impending Omani invasion of Zanzibar in 1698. By the turn of the century, Lunda's power is increasing, conquering the Chokwe people. Finally, in 1709, the Congolese Civil War ended, Pedro IV becoming Mwene Congo. The kingdom, however, is left ruined, depopulated by decades of war, unable to do anything against the Portuguese. They, however, were more interested in Brazil, but they did vassalize Matamba finally in 1744, free of the might of Queen Njinga. By 1800, Lunda is faltering due to political infighting, and the Chokwe break free. Mbunda becomes a true organized state in response, and Luyana moves into the power vacuum in the upper Zambezi. 1830, Mbunda and Luyana clash, the former occupying the latter's northwestern territories. Brazil became independent in 1825, leaving Portugal with basically only her African holdings. So, in 1836, Angola is reorganized as a province. The loss of its largest colony and pressure from Britain means this year the Atlantic slave trade is ended. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, perhaps as many as half of all Africans exported as slaves were from Angola. They numbered almost 6 million, all captured, bought, shipped like livestock to a new life as chattel. This industry of slaving, of commodifying human lives, disrupted the communities of Angola and the Congo, to say nothing of the effects it had, and still has, on the societies of places like the United States, Brazil, and the Caribbean. But slavery itself was not yet abolished in Angola. They just couldn't be exported off the continent. Deprived of its most lucrative industry, Angola had to reorient towards cash crops and mining, and colonial authorities turned towards the interior, incorporating the Ovumbundu, Nyaneka, and Matamba into the colony. Events in the Namib and Kalahari began to stir the southern regions of Angola. Wars between the Nama and the Herero forced many of the latter to migrate into the Kalahari around 1850. Those remaining become the Himba. Intensifying its colonial operations, Portugal aids Pedro V in securing his throne, and in exchange acquires Congo as a vassal in 1859, completing their objective of nearly 400 years. They also abolished slavery for good measure. Boers from the Transvaal begin their trek into the Kalahari in the 1870s, eventually migrating into the Okavango and Ovambo lands. These Dorsland trekkers reached Angola in 1880, where the Portuguese let them settle to hopefully buttress their control of the region. By the late 19th century, Portugal could no longer pretend it had a right to Africa and Asia. Europe eyed Africa as a new frontier to be explored, conquered, and developed, and on that front, Portugal couldn't even claim seniority, despite being there for over 400 years. Britain, France, and Germany had long since outpaced both Portugal and Spain. Portugal saw the writing on the wall. Britain was advancing from the Cape, and France had conquered Luango in 1883, and it was only a matter of time before Portugal was edged out. Portugal found an ally in Germany, who was keen on preserving the balance of power and channeling rival energies constructively. The Berlin Conference was held from 1884 to 1885. Here, the great powers negotiated for spheres of influence in Africa. The coast was divvied up, but to claim the interior, nations had to negotiate with local chiefs and then with their European neighbors. The scramble for Africa was on. Portugal was grandfathered in for Angola, but further north in the Congo they had to wheel and deal. The Treaty of Simulambuku placed Ngoyo under Portuguese protection, known as Portuguese Congo, with its capital at Cabida. But the International Congo Society, which we'll talk about next time, was given rights to the vast Congo basin, and Portugal was obliged to give them an outlet to the sea. Portugal also eyed Zambezia, eager to connect Angola with Mozambique. 1886, France and Germany approved of Portugal's designs, and borders were drawn. The boundary between French and Portuguese Congo was roughly from the coast between Lakes Cayo and Masabi along a northeasterly line to about the watershed between the Huilu and Chilwango rivers, thence southwards along the Mayombe Mountains to the boundary with the Congo Free State. Further south, the boundary between Angola and German Southwest Africa was defined as the Kunene River to about 17 degrees 23 minutes 30 seconds south latitude to the Kubango River. Where it went from there isn't clear. I've shown it going east from the 18th degree south latitude. British men like Henry Hamilton Johnston and Cecil Rhodes disregarded Portugal's ambitions, having their own of reaching from Cape to Cairo. Despite the efforts of Alexandre de Serpapito in securing Zambezia for Portugal, she caved when Britain advised her to reconsider her priorities in 1890. Portugal withdrew, leading to political instability at home, but Britain won. 1891, a treaty was signed with Britain deciding the border with Mozambique, but Angola was deferred to later. The Portuguese were hemmed in at Barotseland, and north of the northeasterly line bounding the Caprivi Strip. Maybe to soothe her hurt pride and to emphasize greater claim to her holdings, Portugal renamed Angola to the State of Western Africa, similar to Mozambique. The Congo Free State had been expanding its control over the Congo Basin, and delineated its border with Angola. The northern bit starts about halfway between the Congo's mouth and Cabinda, along a dell to about 5 degrees 45 minutes south latitude, due east to 12 degrees 30 minutes east longitude, northwards to the Luali River, down it to the Chilwango River, thence to the Mayombe Mountains. The southern border starts at the mouth of the Congo, up to just before Matadi, then east along some lines and small rivers towards the Lubishi River to its confluence with the Kwango, down until it reaches the Utunguila, along it eastwards across some minor rivers and lines to the 8th degree south latitude, east and north along more rivers to the 7th degree south latitude, going east and dipping a little further south until it reaches the Kasai River. From there, the boundary goes all the way south to the watershed between the Congo and Zambezi. Thus, Portugal had to give a strip of land to the Congo Free State, creating an exclave at Cabinda, but in exchange got a portion of the Congo Basin. 1893, the state of Western Africa goes back to the province of Angola. In 1900, the Chokwe are conquered, beginning Portugal's campaign inward. In Zambia's video, I made a mistake and said in 1899, when the Lozi Kingdom became the Barotseland Protectorate, the border with Angola was defined. This actually didn't happen until 1905. From a point along the Zambezi-Congo divide, the boundary followed more lines and rivers until it went down the Nyela River to the 13th south latitude, thence west to the 22nd east longitude, and then south to the eastern edge of the Kwando's floodplain to the border with German Southwest Africa. Angola's little eastern nubbin was probably given as a courtesy, allowing access to the Zambezi. Of course, like with the Caprivi Strip, Portugal was duped because swamps and Victoria Falls made boat travel impossible all the way to the sea. I bet the British were really proud of themselves for that. Now, with defined frontiers, the Portuguese could focus on bringing their new colony under control. The Ovambo are brought to heel in 1907, Kasanje in 1911. The Congo War against the Mbunda begins in 1914, just as the Congo Kingdom is annexed after a failed revolt by King Manuel III. Portugal joins World War I in 1916 and is likely distracted from its colonial engagements, but finally in 1917, Mbunda and Kavango are subdued. Portugal now reigns supreme in Angola. Portugal governed Angola with a civilizing mission, which meant conversion to Catholicism, learning Portuguese, transition to a market economy, and general adoption of European ways. A tribe of Himba, the Mukubal, resisted these efforts in the 1930s, and for their trouble were rounded up in concentration camps and subjected to the terrors of Portuguese authorities. Of a population of only several thousand, many hundreds died. A proper genocide. Angola was developed as a source of raw materials like rubber, minerals, and ivory, and railroads were laid to facilitate this, built with forced labor, of course. A 1926 coup led to a military dictatorship, and the overseas provinces were rebranded as colonies. Political instability in Portugal led to António de Oliveira Salazar's Estado Novo regime in 1933, which wished to bring the colonies closer into Portugal's orbit. This led to some reform in Angola, but also a doubling down of Portuguese control. Salazar wished to recontextualize Portugal's centuries-old empire as a plural continental country. Portugal was a multi-ethnic, multiracial, and multi-continental single Catholic nation, diverse but united. Portugal sat out the Second World War, and so was not affected by the same financial woes as Britain and France, but the changing international climate made their position increasingly untenable. The two new big boys on the block, the US and USSR, both espoused anti-colonial ideals and supported decolonization in Africa, even if they disagreed about the particulars. In 1951, Portugal returned Angola to provincial status and formally merged their Congo protectorate into it. The strong dominance in Angola of Portuguese over the natives caused resentment, and a growing intellectual class of Africans increasingly advocated for self-determination, backed by the UN Resolution 1514. But abandonment of its overseas provinces would leave Portugal a weakened remnant, lobbing off the limbs of the national body. This was unacceptable. Starting in 1961, pro-independence rebels waged a guerrilla war against the Portuguese, igniting the colonial war in Angola as well as Mozambique. Two parties emerged, each associated with an ethnic group: the National Liberation Front of Angola, FNLA, of the Congo, and the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, MPLA, of the Ubuntu. The colonial war became another battleground of the Cold War. The Soviets backed the rebels, while South Africa and Rhodesia helped to maintain the colonial regime. The Portuguese were able to exploit divisions in the rebels' camp, joined by the Ovambo-oriented National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, UNITA, in 1966. Portugal was actually winning by the 1970s, but the war had taken its toll on the Portuguese people, leading to the Carnation Revolution in 1974. Portugal would comply and withdraw from its empire. After 400 years. 1975, Angola was finally granted independence, leading to peace and prosperity for all. Just kidding. Immediately, the three former rebel factions had a falling out. The MPLA declared a new Marxist-Leninist Socialist People's Republic of Angola. The UNITA declared their own rival Maoist Democratic People's Republic of Angola, while the FNLA sided with UNITA. They weren't communists, but hated the Maoists least. Thus kicked off the Angolan Civil War, complicated further when Cabida in the north wished to secede, citing its former status as Portuguese Congo, distinct from Angola. The Republic of Cabida was crushed in 1976. There were oil reserves found there, after all. Yet another Cold War conflict, with the Soviets and Cuba supporting the People's Republic, while the US and South Africa supported the Democratic People's Republic. This war soon bled together with the concurrent South African border war in Namibia. The MPLA controlled the cities and coast, while UNITA controlled the interior. Neighboring Zaire allowed UNITA and FNLA to base themselves there until 1978, and then FNLA fell apart as a military force. American money must have convinced UNITA to abandon its Maoist roots, coming out as anti-communist. As with many of these conflicts, neither side was able to fully defeat the other, and the end of the Cold War in 1991 led to the Bessesi Accords. An attempt at multi-party democracy was attempted, but a rocky election in 1992 led to the murder of UNITA leaders. The war resumed. U.S. policy shifted to the MPLA, the legitimate government of the new República de Angola, Republic of Angola, who steadily pushed UNITA back. A truce was signed in 1994, but no treaty. The UN sent peacekeepers, but fighting resumed in 1998, UNITA using blood diamonds to fund their operations. But finally, in 2002, leader of UNITA, Jonas Savimbi, was killed, and the rebels surrendered. Angola had endured war for 41 years, comparable to the Congolese Civil War centuries earlier. Around 1 million people had died, millions more displaced, and hundreds of thousands of Portuguese fled in the wake of native reprisals. Much of the country was ruined, and continues to be littered with landmines. Elections have become stable, but the MPLA remains in power, and corruption is high. A low-intensity guerrilla conflict continues in Cabinda for independence. However, after the war, the country has begun rebuilding, and now has one of the fastest-growing economies in the world, outperforming its erstwhile sister Mozambique. Angola grows a large amount of crops, both food and cash, and exports large amounts of minerals, diamonds, and especially oil. Angola is Africa's largest supplier of petroleum, though has become incredibly dependent on it. Alright, that was a full episode, huh? Well, it's gonna get fuller with our next country, the Congo. Wait, there's two. Why? Obviously, we're gonna find out next time, but I think I'll start with the Democratic Republic of the Congo. See you there.